When we hear the word abolition, we immediately think about tearing something down. Abolition in this country in the 18th and 19th centuries was the movement that sought to end slavery and continues to be what first comes to mind for many people when we talk about abolition. Today, though, the conversations about abolition have shifted, and it's common to see and hear messages such as abolish the police, abolish ICE, demands that we get rid of the systems that are in place. Dr. Crystal T. Laura shared, "I think of abolition as the deliberate and intentional removal of imprisonment, isolation, punitive institutionalization as the foremost way that we address issues of harm and healing." Abolition is the deliberate and intentional removal of systems that cause harm, yes, but abolition justice inherently also has to include the building of something new. Not rebuilding, which in many ways was what happened during Reconstruction after the abolition of slavery in the United States. The old systems were simply shifted to continue to allow for the oppression and profit off of the people who were freed from chattel slavery. True abolition means creating something totally different and ideally better. In order to do that, you have to tear down these systems and start from scratch. The challenge there is that these systems, these ideologies, are so ingrained into society that we cannot imagine what we would create to replace them. Eric Stanley wrote, "Abolition is not some distant future, but something we create in every moment when we say no to the traps of empire and yes to the nourishing possibilities dreamed of and practiced by our ancestors and friends. Every time we insist on accessible and affirming healthcare, safe and quality education, meaningful and secure employment, loving and healing relationships, and being our full and whole selves, we are doing abolition. Abolition is about breaking down things that oppress and building up things that nourish. Abolition is the practice of transformation in the here and now and the ever after. Abolition is building things up. What do we want to build? What are we called to build as UUs, as a people who value justice and equity and generosity, as a people who believe in transformation of ourselves, our communities, and our society?
This conversation about abolition grew out of a congregational study action issue. At our Unitarian Universalist General Assembly this past summer, we had a congregational study action issue, CSAI, for those who really like acronyms. It's a multi-year process intended to have people in our congregations talk about or consider a justice issue that most of us do not already know a lot about. The point of a CSAI is to encourage sermons and workshops to get us talking and thinking before we draft a statement or work toward any changes. When I heard the abolition proposal, my initial thought was, yeah, prison reform. That's a worthy goal. I agree, we should talk about that. But this is not simply a conversation about making changes to how our prison system works in our society. At root, it's about crime and punishment, yes, but theologically, it's asking us to look at what we mean by the word crime, to recognize that not all the behaviors we have categorized as crimes are about harm, and that not all harm is categorized as a crime. Digging deep, we can ask, what do we do with people who cause harm? Are some people disposable? What would redemption look like, or rehabilitation, or repair? One aspect of this conversation I eventually realized is that we're also talking about issues in our society that lead people to break the law, or what we call break the law, right? And end up in prison. We can recognize that there's issues of poverty, racism, addiction, homelessness that are all connected to this issue of abolition. If we abolish prisons, we will also need to abolish the conditions that too often lead a person to break the law. For example, we'll need universal health care and affordable housing and a minimum basic income. These are ways in which we can deal with the things that often land a person in prison. This conversation leads us to consider all the harm that happens that never gets labeled as criminal. Can we recognize that climate degradation, wage theft, income inequality are not criminal, but are issues that we will want to tackle if we're getting serious about building a just world without relying on the current prison industrial complex? Abolition has this holistic vision, bringing in a broad swath of justice issues we Unitarian Universalists tend to be actively working on already. We talk about intersectionality and how often our struggles in one area overlap in other areas in our lives. This conversation about abolition touches on LGBTQ issues, touches on immigration, reproductive rights, human trafficking, political corruption, and addiction, and so many other issues. It starts with the question, what counts as a crime? And how will we respond as a community? What might society look like if we begin with responses to these questions that take our Unitarian Universalist values seriously? This isn't merely about abolishing the systems that do not work, that are in fact causing harm. It's also about imagining what we might do when we start to build something new.
Frederick Jameson said, "It's easier for us to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism." Really sit with that. It's easier for us to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. We can include capitalism when talking about abolition. We can include it along with the abolishment of modern-day slavery, of the prison industrial complex, of human trafficking, of forced labor, of family policing, of all of these systems. It was my youngest's birthday this past week, and they wanted McDonald's for dinner. Wednesdays are a really busy day for us, so we went through the driveway on the way home from rehearsal, and they noticed that there was a sign on the window that said that they didn't accept bills larger than a 50. And they asked why. And I replied that it was probably because they don't keep much cash in the register, so they wouldn't have change for a larger bill. And then I kind of flippantly added, they probably empty the registers regularly so that there isn't much in there in case they get robbed. And my kids were so offended that someone might rob McDonald's, right? To which I responded, wouldn't it be great if we lived in a society where people didn't need to resort to robbing McDonald's? When we talk about abolition, this is what we mean. Can we imagine a society where no one is living in poverty, where no one feels like they need to steal to survive? Alan Dettlaff, a professor, author, and abolitionist, shares that statistics show that nearly 3/4 of children in foster care are there because of neglect, which is largely associated with poverty and disproportionately affects brown and black children. Can we imagine a society where there is no need for children to be removed from their families for the crime of being poor.
In 2 weeks, on Sunday, April 12th, we are planning a workshop based on Mariame Kaba's book, We Do This Till We Free Us. We used an excerpt from the book as our reading this morning. Becky, you have a copy of the book there. Can I just show folks here's the cover. This is a workshop that Alex Compton and Catherine Magdala will be leading in 2 weeks, and the Social Action Hub is supporting this workshop. One of the things that we've done is we've ordered a bunch of these books. So if you want a copy to borrow or buy, we'll have some available soon. We're going to crack open this conversation around abolition together. If you already have it all figured out, that's great. Maybe this class isn't for you. But if you're curious, if you're beginning to see some connections and want more, then we can start a serious conversation about abolition and what might be possible together. Last week in my sermon on the rejected stone, I said, we are called to take care of each other, to build a society in which we all can thrive, not just some, but all. We are called to denounce the idea that some people are disposable and unworthy. The rejected and the outcast are more than welcome here. They are celebrated, central. If that's true, then we will want to start talking seriously about abolition together. Last month, in my sermon, Do We Have Enough Love?, I shared this. Friends, our theology does not call us to be among the respected classes. We are not called to whisper sweet platitudes of God's love into the ears of the oppressors. Instead, we are called to remember that our love is radical. Our faith calls us to build just and loving communities. Our faith calls us to get out among the people in need and get our hands dirty, to let our days be the evidence of our hearts on fire. If that rings true, then we will want to start talking seriously about abolition together. Last fall, in my forgiveness sermon, Sometimes Things Break was the title. I reminded us that sometimes things break. That doesn't mean we're bad people. We can thrive and grow when broken, perhaps only when we are broken. How we respond to brokenness builds the world around us. It's not the brokenness that matters. What matters is our response. What matters is our love. So if that sounds right to you, then we will want to start talking seriously about abolition together. Friends, this is something that's been building among us for a while. It only seems impossible because it's a big idea. But all the pieces are right in front of us, and we've been talking about it together for a few years. Abolition only seems radical because it is. But that's what we're here for. Radical love. The kind of love that can get all of us free.
W.E.B. Du Bois wrote at the beginning of Looking Forward, how two theories of the future of America clashed and blended just after the Civil War. The one was abolition democracy, based on freedom, intelligence, and power for all men. And the other was an industry for private profit directed by the autocracy determined at any price to amass wealth and power. The rise of autocracy and an industry determined to amass wealth and power at any cost has created a society where only a few can truly thrive, and the rest of us are confined within systems that judge our worth based solely on our monetary assets and find us lacking. Abolition goes beyond making a few changes to the systems that already exist. Abolition requires a fundamentally different way of living. It requires building things up that nourish everyone. It requires transformation in the here and now and ever after. And to get there, we need to start the demolition. In a world without end, may it be so.
Let us join in singing our closing hymn. It is in our Teal hymnal supplements as number 1017, Building a New Way.